My name is Stephanie Caldwell. I am 32 years old, and on what was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life, the doors of St. Andrew's Chapel in Savannah, Georgia burst open in the middle of the ceremony. Every head in that room turned, and there he was, my ex-boyfriend, Marcus Webb, standing in the doorway in a rumpled jacket, his chest rising and falling like he had run the last block to get there. His eyes found me immediately, standing at the altar in my dress, flowers in my hands, my heart stopping completely.
He pointed at me,
and in a voice loud enough to reach every corner of that chapel, he shouted, "She doesn't love you. She was with me last month." For a moment, the entire room held its breath. 112 people. Not one of them moved. I stood frozen at the altar. I could feel the heat rising in my face. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in that room. I could hear the silence the way you only hear silence when it follows something that cannot be taken back. And then my groom, James, slowly turned around. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he stepped away from the altar and began walking straight toward him, calm and unhurried, the way a man walks when he already knows exactly what he is about to do. He stopped 2 feet in front of Marcus, and he said something so quietly that only Marcus could hear it. Not a shout, not a threat, just words, delivered in a voice so steady and certain that the entire room went completely still, trying to understand what had just happened. What followed next left every single person in that chapel holding their breath. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. I met Marcus Webb when I was 26. He was charming in the way that certain people are charming, effortlessly, instinctively, in a way that makes you feel like the most interesting person in any room when his attention is on you. We dated for almost 2 years. In the beginning, it was good, exciting. He made grand gestures and said the right things, and I mistook intensity for depth, which is an easy mistake to make when you are in your mid-20s and someone is paying you the kind of attention that feels like being lit up from the inside. But slowly, over time, things shifted. Marcus had a way of making everything about himself without ever appearing to do so. If I was having a hard week at work, the conversation would drift, gently and without any obvious force, towards something he was dealing with. If I achieved something I was proud of, he would congratulate me briefly and then introduce a story about his own accomplishments that somehow outpaced mine. He never said anything cruel. He never raised his voice. But after every conversation, I came away feeling slightly smaller than when I had entered it. I stayed longer than I should have. That is the honest truth. I stayed because the good moments were genuinely good, and because leaving felt like admitting I had made a mistake, and because Marcus had a way of making you feel, in the moments when you pulled away, that you were the one being unreasonable. When I finally ended things, 2.5 years into the relationship, he did not take it quietly. There were phone calls, long messages, a period of intermittent contact that I handled poorly by sometimes responding and sometimes not, which I knew even then was a mistake. Eventually it stopped. He met someone else. I moved forward. I told myself it was finished. I should have been more certain of that before I let it become finished on my terms only. I met James Caldwell, James Porter, before we married, at a friend's dinner party when I was 29. He was a high school history teacher who coached the debate team on the side and spent his summers doing renovation work on a cabin in the North Carolina mountains that he was slowly, painstakingly restoring by himself. He was nothing like Marcus. He was quiet where Marcus was loud. He listened more than he spoke. He had opinions he could defend without needing you to agree with them. He made me feel, from the very first conversation, not lit up and breathless, but something better and more durable than that. He made me feel steady, like myself, like there was enough room in any conversation we had for both of us to exist fully. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on the porch of the cabin in the mountains on a Sunday morning in October, with no audience and no grand gesture, just the 2 of us and the trees, and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and a question he asked like he already knew the answer, but wanted to hear me say it anyway. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned the wedding for the following September. St. Andrew's Chapel in Savannah, where James's parents had been married 34 years earlier. 112 guests. My sister as maid of honor. Simple flowers, good food, a string quartet that James had researched for 3 months because he cared about music in a way that was one of the things I loved most about him. Everything was planned. Everything was ready. What I had not planned for was Marcus. He had reached out once, about 6 weeks before the wedding. A text message, brief and casual, that said he had heard I was getting married and wanted to wish me well. I stared at it for a long time before deciding not to respond. There was nothing to say. I was not angry. I simply had nothing to offer him. I left it unread and did not think about it again. That was a miscalculation, because Marcus, as I should have known by then, did not respond well to being left in silence. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The chapel was full of September light, the golden late afternoon kind that comes through old stained glass and turns everything warm and amber. My father walked me down the aisle. James watched me come toward him with an expression I will keep in my memory for the rest of my life. Not performative, not practiced, just real, present, happy in that quiet way that is more moving than any grand display. We reached the altar. My father placed my hand in James's and stepped back. The officiant, a family friend named Pastor David Chun, smiled at us both and began. We were 5 minutes in. Pastor Chun was midway through the opening address, the part about the meaning of commitment and the choice two people make to build a life together, when I heard it. The sound of the chapel doors opening. People turned. There is always a moment of ordinary assumption when a door opens late in a ceremony. A latecomer, a child who slipped out and is coming back. And you can feel the room make that assumption before it corrects itself. The correction happened fast, because Marcus walked in like someone who had rehearsed this. Down the center aisle, no hesitation. Eyes fixed on me. His jacket was wrinkled. His jaw was set. He had the look of a man who had talked himself into something over a very long period of time and had finally arrived at the moment he'd been building toward. He stopped about 10 rows from the altar. He pointed directly at me. "She doesn't love you," he said, loud and clear. "She was with me last month." The chapel went silent the way a chapel goes silent when something happens that a chapel is not supposed to contain. I felt James's hand tighten around mine, just slightly, a single small pressure. I looked at him. His face was turned away from me, toward Marcus. I could not see his expression from where I stood, but I could see his shoulders, straight, unhurried, completely still. And then he let go of my hand. He turned from the altar and walked toward Marcus with a quietness that was somehow louder than anything else happening in that room. Not fast, not aggressive, just purposeful. The walk of a man who knows exactly where he is going and why. He stopped 2 feet in front of Marcus, and in a voice that did not carry to the pews, that was meant only for Marcus, and that Marcus would later describe to someone who told someone who eventually told me, James said, "I know who you are. Stephanie told me about you. All of it. She told me because that's what people do when they trust each other. There's nothing you can say in this room that I don't already know. And there's nothing you can say that changes what I know about her. So I'm going to ask you one time, quietly, to turn around and leave. Because the next thing that happens in this building is my wedding. And you are not part of it." Marcus stared at him. James held eye contact and did not move. The room was absolutely, entirely, completely still. 112 people. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seat. The string quartet had stopped playing. Pastor Chin stood at the altar with his hands folded, waiting. I learned later that several guests said afterward it was the longest 30 seconds they had ever experienced inside a building. Then Marcus looked past James at me one final time. I met his eyes. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply stood at the altar in my dress with my flowers in my hands and looked back at him with all the calm I had and waited for him to understand that there was nothing here for him. That this room, this day, this life, none of it had a place for him in it. He looked away first. He turned around. He walked back up the aisle. The doors of St. Andrew's Chapel opened and closed behind him. For a moment nobody breathed. And then James turned back around and walked to the altar. He took both of my hands in his. He looked at me with that same quiet, real expression he had worn when I came down the aisle, as if nothing had been interrupted, as if the only thing that had ever been happening in this room was the two of us, here, together. "Ready," he said softly. I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and released, from relief and love and the particular joy of being known completely by someone who chooses you anyway. "Ready," I said, and the room exhaled. Someone started clapping. I think it was James's college roommate, David, who has never in his life missed an opportunity to start an applause. And then everyone was clapping, and the string quartet found their place again. And Pastorton smiled and shook his head slightly in the way people do when life has just been more dramatic than they expected. And we got married. We have been married for 7 months now. The cabin in the mountains is coming along. James replaced the porch flooring in July, and I painted the front door a deep navy blue that looks extraordinary against the trees in the morning. Marcus has not been in contact since that day. I don't imagine he will be. People ask me sometimes what it felt like standing at the altar during those 30 seconds. And the honest answer is that it felt like exactly what it was, an old chapter trying to rewrite itself in the middle of a new one, and not managing it, because the new chapter was already too solid, too real, too thoroughly built on something that could not be shaken by a man in a rumpled jacket who had run the last block to get there. James knew everything about Marcus before that day. I had told him early in our relationship the way you tell someone everything when you are trying to love them honestly. And he had listened and asked a few questions and then held my hand and said, "Thank you for telling me." And that was it. No jealousy, no interrogation, just the simple, clean act of receiving something difficult and holding it carefully. That is who he is. And when Marcus walked into that chapel, James didn't defend me because he doubted me. He handled it because he knew me. There is a difference between those two things that I understand now more deeply than I ever have before. Some people come back to test what you have built. And the best answer is not an argument. It is simply a life so solid and so true that there is nowhere for the test to take hold. That is what we have. And it is more than enough.